On December 26th of 1996, the quietness of a frigid winter morning was interrupted by a horrific discovery that would loom over the city of Boulder for decades to come. It was on this day that a 911 call came through to the Boulder Police Department from a woman frantically explaining that she discovered a ransom note indicating that her daughter had been kidnapped from her family's mansion.
Well, we have reason to believe that he's a maniac.
I don't accept the whole situation.
Sentenced Theodore Bundy to die in the electric chair for
brother and sister as the cadence of a beautiful daughter.
investigators lay a suspected Francis Tucker.
At 5:52 in the morning, a 911 call came through to the Boulder Police Department from a woman frantically explaining that she discovered a ransom note indicating that her daughter had been kidnapped from her family's mansion. The note demanded $118,000 in exchange for her daughter's safe return, and it specified that any police involvement would result in the immediate execution of the young girl. The woman on the phone was Patsy Ramsey, wife of John Ramsey, who was the CEO and president of a successful company called Access Graphics. The Ramsey family was wealthy and well respected in the Boulder community, and now their beloved daughter, JonBenet, was missing, seemingly kidnapped from under their noses as they slept. But before we dive deeper into the notorious case of JonBenét Ramsey, let's take a look into her life prior to this fateful day in 1996. Who was JonBenet? JonBenet was born on August 6th in 1990 and was following in her mom's footsteps as a beauty pageant queen from a young age. Patsy Ramsey won Miss West Virginia in 1977, and by the age of 6, JonBenet had already won various child beauty pageant titles, including Little Miss Colorado. She lived with her parents and her older brother Burke, who was 9 at the time, in a beautiful 5-bedroom, 8-bathroom home. Her father had a net worth of $6.2 million in 1996, so the family had the financial freedom to live a luxurious lifestyle. In fact, on the morning that Patsy discovered the ransom note, the family was supposed to catch a flight on their private jet to their second home in Michigan. But instead, December 26th of 1996 would be the day that flipped the Ramsey family's world upside down. The first officers arrived at the Ramsey home within 10 minutes of Patsy's 911 call, but since it was a holiday, seasoned officers weren't on duty. Instead, the officers that responded to the call were new to the department and fairly inexperienced. Shortly after police arrived, the White family, who were friends and neighbors of the Ramsey family, showed up to help with the search for JonBenet. Police allowed the family into the Ramsey home, which was just the beginning of the Boulder Police Department's failure to keep the crime scene and any potential evidence preserved for testing. The contamination of evidence would prove to be a massive hindrance in the solving of this case. It is reported that around 7:30 a.m., John Ramsey was preparing the $118,000 that was demanded in the ransom note. The note stated that the kidnappers would be giving John a call between 8 and 10 in the morning to arrange a pickup of the money. But 10 a.m. came and went without hearing anything. Eventually, detectives and FBI agents would show up at the Ramsey home to assist the cops that were already on site. Around 1 p.m., a BPD detective named Linda Arndt told John to search the house again, and heartbreakingly, not long after he began his search, John came across the lifeless body of his daughter in the wine cellar of their basement. In a later interview with ABC News, John described the manner in which he found her body. She was lying on a white blanket. The blanket was wrapped around her. Her hands were tied above her head. She had tape over her mouth. I immediately knelt down over her, felt her cheek, took the tape off immediately off her mouth. I tried to untie the cord that was around her arms, and I couldn't get the knot untied. JonBenet also had handmade garrote around her neck. For those of you that don't know, garrote is a handheld ligature device with a screw attached, used for strangling. The screw allows you to slowly tighten the ligature until the victim is asphyxiated. In JonBenet's case, The garrote had a piece of a paintbrush from the Ramsey home used as the screw. As soon as John discovered her body lying in the basement, he picked her up, took her upstairs, and placed her on the floor. The police then moved her body again from the floor to a sofa. JonBenet's body was moved not once, but twice before the coroner arrived, around 8 p.m. This was just another massive setback in finding the person responsible for her death. DNA evidence could have been compromised, and detectives were unable to thoroughly examine the crime scene as it was left by the killer. Following the autopsy, the coroner determined that 6-year-old JonBenet's cause of death was asphyxia by strangulation and craniocerebral trauma, meaning that she also suffered a large blow to the head that left her skull fractured. There was blood found in her underwear, along with DNA. Based on the size of her hymenal opening for her age, the coroner determined that sexual abuse was probable. The fact that JonBenet had a history of bedwetting supports the probability of sexual abuse as well. She had many abrasions on her body, including on her neck, cheek, and legs. It was never determined what weapon was used to strike JonBenet in the head with such force, but some items from the Ramsey home were possibilities. A baseball bat found in the home had carpet fibers from the basement on it, and a flashlight in their kitchen matched the shape of the injury to the child's head. But again, the murder weapon also could have been long gone and never recovered. It was later determined that the DNA found in her underwear could have been from the manufacturer, though, and therefore might not be related to the murder at all. The house had no signs of forced entry, although there was a window in the basement that had been broken for quite some time before the attack occurred. There was a suitcase placed underneath the window that was not normally placed there, and it was thought that the intruders might have used the suitcase to get back out of the broken window. However, the dust and cobwebs on the window were undisturbed, and it didn't seem as though anyone had used it to enter or exit the home. There were no fingerprints found anywhere on or near the window. Now, let's take a deeper look at the ransom note found by Patsy that morning. I have to say this is one of the strangest and most unsettling details about this case. It's hard to make it make sense. The ransom note itself is 2.5 pages long, written on a legal pad with a Sharpie pen, and it was determined that both items came from inside the Ramsey home. What's even more strange is that the writer of the note, assumingly the kidnappers, must have spent more than 20 minutes writing inside the home that night. A documentary on CBS tested this, having 3 experts copy down the entirety of the ransom note by hand. Each of them took over 20 minutes to finish. This alone raised some red flags, because if you were the intruder, wouldn't you want to be out of there, undetected, as quickly as possible? The note was significantly longer and more wordy than your typical ransom note, and some believe that this was because whoever wrote it was trying to mislead the police. The CBS documentary, called The Case of JonBenét Ramsey, had a professional forensic linguist create a profile on the author based on the note, and he determined that the writer was likely a woman over 30 years old who speaks English as their first language. These qualities don't necessarily match the profile of most violent kidnapping criminals. He also noted that the phrases in the ransom note were shockingly similar to phrases that the Ramseys used in their Christmas newsletter of that year. All of this seems especially fishy after knowing that the materials used to write the note belonged to the Ramseys. And if that's not strange enough, let's talk about the amount that the kidnappers requested in exchange for JonBenet to be returned safely. From the outside, $118,000 seems to be a completely random amount to request. But when you look closer, $118,000 is nearly the exact amount that John Ramsey had received for his bonus that year. In theory, though, if a kidnapper broke into the Ramsey household that night, it wouldn't be too far-fetched that they would know the financial situation of the family. One final piece of information that's important to note surrounding the ransom situation is that the note said that the Ramseys would receive a call between 8 and 10 a.m. that day with instructions on how to drop off the money. No call ever came through to the Ramsey household that morning, and neither John nor Patsy ever even mentioned it. Detectives on the scene found this to be odd, because you would think that the couple would be anxiously awaiting that call for news on the whereabouts of JonBenet. The ransom note is probably the most widely discussed and controversial piece of evidence from this case, and after being dissected countless times by professionals and internet sleuths alike, it just feels a bit off. So who killed JonBenét Ramsey? Over the decades, there have been many theories as to what could have happened inside the Ramsey home on Christmas night in 1996. Just recently, there was a breakthrough. Perhaps the suspect with the most suspicious background altogether is Gary Oliva, who was arrested in 2016 for possession of child pornography. He's currently serving a 10-year prison sentence in Colorado for the crime. At the time of his arrest, Oliva had over 300 photos of or relating to JonBenet on his phone. Oliva actually admitted in letters he sent from prison to a former classmate that he killed JonBenet, stating that he was in love with her and that it was an accident. The classmate, named Michael Vale, has since turned the letters in to the Boulder Police Department. Vale suspected Oliva was responsible for the murder of JonBenet for over 2 decades before receiving the confession letters. According to Vale, Oliva had actually called him on the night of December 26th in 1996. Oliva was crying, saying, "I hurt a little girl."
I heard a little girl. It was shock. It was pure shock.
Oliva didn't provide any other details, except that the incident happened in Boulder, Colorado. The following day, the news broke that a 6-year-old girl had been murdered in Boulder. Vale immediately contacted the Boulder police, explaining everything he knew. But he never heard back. In an interview, Vale said, "3 months later, I called the police again to find out what was going on in its investigation of Gary. But instead, I was sent to a police answering machine set up for tips on the JonBenet case. I left a message on the recorded line, and again, I never heard back from investigators." At the time of the murder, Gary Oliva was a registered sex offender, living in close proximity to the Ramsey home. He even attended a candlelight vigil for the child after her death. In December of 2000, Oliva was arrested in Boulder for criminal trespassing, and at the time of his arrest, he had a photo of JonBenet with him, as well as a poem titled Ode to JonBenet that he had written. DNA from Oliva was collected at the time of his arrest, but it was not a match for the DNA found in the crime scene. Police seem to have dismissed this confession as plausible because the DNA wasn't a match. But it's important to remember that the crime scene wasn't properly secured, and there was the potential for evidence to be contaminated. Another suspect in this case was a man named John Carr, who was a teacher and living in Thailand at the time. He was facing child pornography charges in America and confessed to killing JonBenét Ramsey in 2006, which led to his extradition to the US. Again, there was no evidence that linked Carr back to the murder, and it was possible that he confessed simply to be sent back to the United States, avoiding spending time in Thai prisons. Another man named Bill McReynolds, who played Santa Claus at a few of the Ramseys' holiday parties, was suspected because of his close relationship with JonBenet. He had been at the family's house only days prior to the murder and seemed to have some sort of obsession with the little girl. At some point, JonBenet gifted McReynolds a jar full of glitter, and he later said, "Her stardust was all I took with me for good luck when I had heart surgery. Her murder was harder on me than my operation. She made a profound change in me. I felt very close to the little girl. I don't really have other children that I have this special relationship with. Not even my own children or my grandchildren. I've asked my wife to mix the stardust JonBenet gave me with my ashes. We're going to go up behind the cabin here and have it blow away in the wind." There was no DNA evidence suggesting Mr. McReynolds was the killer, but his closeness to the 6-year-old was considered to be cause for concern. And of course, because there was no direct evidence of an intruder and the ransom note was written inside the Ramsey home, John, Patsy, and 9-year-old Burke Ramsey were all considered to be suspects as well. One popular theory pegs John Ramsey as the killer. The detective on scene that day, Detective Linda Arndt, stated that Mr. Ramsey was acting strange on the day of the murder. His daughter still hadn't been found, and John was seen reading through his mail. When Detective Arndt suggested that he search the house again for JonBenet, he started in the basement and discovered her body in the wine cellar within minutes. Fleet White, one of the neighbors who was assisting in the search, was with John when they found the body. Mr. White later stated that John called him out before he'd even turned on the light in the wine cellar. The wine cellar had also allegedly been searched prior to John discovering the body, which raises suspicion as well. Another theory is that Burke, JonBenet's brother, killed her in a moment of rage. The autopsy revealed that there was a piece of fruit in JonBenet's stomach that hadn't been digested at the time of her death. There was a bowl of pineapple found in the Ramsey kitchen that had Burke's fingerprints on it. The theory is that maybe the young girl took a piece of fruit from her brother's snack bowl, causing him to lash out, even if the extent of which he hurt his sister was an accident. Some pent-up rage could have caused him to snap. His mom was completely focused on JonBenet's pageantry, and Burke could have been jealous of the attention directed towards his sister. When the siblings were younger, JonBenet had to get plastic surgery after Burke hit her in the face with a golf club during an outburst. If that could happen once, it's theorized that it could happen again. Also, it's important to note that JonBenet had been to the doctor 37 times in the year leading up to her death, which is unusually high for a child who is otherwise healthy. A less popular but notable theory is that Patsy could have snapped and killed her daughter. JonBenet had ongoing problems with soiling the bed, and Patsy could have lost her temper in a fit of frustration. It was Patsy's paintbrush that secured the garrote around JonBenet's neck after all. The way in which the Ramsey family handled the situation was controversial in general, which just added to the public's suspicion that one of them could have had something to do with it. The family didn't formally talk to police for over 100 days after the murder, but they conducted their first interview with CNN just days after their daughter was found murdered.
I don't know who it is. I don't know if it's a he or a she. But if I were a resident of Boulder, I will tell my friends to keep.
Despite there being no real progress in the case for over a decade, the Ramsey family was cleared of being involved on July 9th of 2008. Just recently, news broke that the DNA evidence under JonBenet's fingernails and her underwear was tested immediately following her murder, and the results came back in early 1997 that the family, housekeeper, and friends of the family were not a match. Despite this evidence debunking the theories that the family had anything to do with it, the Boulder Police Department continued investigating the family for over a decade, wasting valuable time and resources that could have been put towards finding the actual killer. John Ramsey commented on this subject, saying, "It didn't fit the investigators' conclusion that one of us was the killer. Police seemed to have blinders on to the fact that anyone else could have murdered JonBenet, and those blinders resulted in years of being wasted in the hunt for the real killer. Hopefully, with the help of this new DNA evidence, there will be justice for JonBenét Ramsey in the near future. Her story lives on, even decades after her death, and her loved ones deserve closure, even though nothing can ever bring back their daughter, sister, granddaughter, niece, and friend." If you enjoyed our deep dive into this story, please subscribe to our channel for everything true crime.